4th, 2020. I'm Lori Kurtz. Could you please introduce yourself, say your pronouns if you care to? Tell me all that you do.
Well, I'm commonly known as the Mad Marquis when I'm working. I work in burlesque and cabaret production, emceeing, and performance. My pronouns are he, him, they, them. I actually don't have a strong preference.
Okay. And just to get it out of the way, what is burlesque?
Well, that's a complex question, and it depends if we want to be historical or what people tend to think it means today. If I were to go with what people tend to believe it means today, which I think is probably the more practical answer, I would say that for most people it equates to striptease artistry, or performative striptease perhaps is a better term because art's very subjective. Originally, of course, it means the same thing as vaudeville or cabaret, and it's sort of a meaningless marketing term that just means, hey, we've got live performance. And but I think these days when most people hear the word, if they have any familiarity with what anybody does in the burlesque community these days, they probably think about performative striptease of some flavor or another.
And is that different than the stripping that happens in clubs?
Depends where you are. One of the interesting things about Portland, Oregon in general, but Portland in particular, is because of our Supreme Court decisions back in the 80s, we don't have blue laws to speak of here anymore. Thank you, Mary's Club. Because of that, a lot of what we do here is no more naked than you might find at a traditional strip club in many other parts of the country. Because in many other parts of the country, they still have restrictions on the amount of skin that can be shown, even in clubs. There are no all-nude strip clubs in many parts of the country, which, of course, we have those here. So I think in Portland, a lot of people would think that the difference would be like the amount of nudity they'd see, even though I have definitely seen burlesque performances in Portland and had them in my shows where performers were like, wait, I'm allowed to be naked? Okay, I'm going to be naked. Particularly out-of-state performers when they find that out when they're visiting because they don't know our laws, of course, can be very interested in that. I've made the joke before that whenever I have a performer from New York and they find out they're allowed to be naked, they're incredibly thrilled and want to be naked because New York has a relatively complex set of blue laws regulating performances depending on what sort of venue you're in and all sorts of things in New York City. Yeah. So the difference in Portland, I would argue, I guess, is that in the strip club here, an exotic dancer is primarily engaging in what actually amounts to a customer service job or a sales job rather than a performative job. Because the bulk of the money they're going to make in any given evening of work is going to be directly interfacing with customers and selling private dances. Or lap dances, if you prefer that term. Same difference in most places. Rules vary from place to place. And they might make some amount of money that they're being tipped on stage, but they're almost certainly not being paid to be there by the venue. Almost every strip club I know of in Portland, and I believe all of them operate on a contractor model where the performers are not being paid anything. The dancers not being paid anything while they're there. Some of the strip clubs in Portland do definitely engage in a more performative style of striptease on stage. There are a couple in particular that's very much the aesthetic they're going for is involved with burlesque. And a lot of the dancers in Portland strip clubs are, in fact, also burlesque performers as well. So you definitely get some direct overlap there. And then once you get out of Portland, it gets a little more sketchy. I've seen burlesque all over the country and also been to strip clubs in various parts of the country. And the differences are interesting, but complex, and I don't even know all the laws that they involve in any given place.
So the Mad Marquis, How did you choose your name?
It's sort of twofold. I've like an unrelenting urge to alliterate all the time, so there's partially it's that. Originally, my stage name was longer because it involved a play on words with my ex-wife's stage name, who was also a performer. And so there was even more M's in it for a while. And when we separated, I just chopped off the surname part of it, basically, and just left the title, if you will, the Mad Marquis. but mostly it's just a joke because my given name is Mark, and so in my head I find it amusing that I'm on stage at a rather adult venue using basically the nickname my mother called me when I was a small child. And then the mad part is just alliteration. And I like that Marquis is also a pun, sort of about your name up in lights on a sign. I think some people think I'm making sort of a Marquis de Sade reference, but I'm not. And I sort of regret out of context when I realize that people might be making that association, because not that I have anything against the S&M community, but because I think there can be some negative associations for some people if they do make that association, either about me and my personality or about like the kind of things I'm representing. And I often tell people the mad is for madcap, not angry. Yeah.
So how do you describe the kind of burlesque that you do?
I, as I said before, I sort of avoid the term artistry because I feel like it's a little too subjective and meaningless. I tend to think of myself as an entertainer first and foremost, because burlesque without an audience is a meaningless activity. You're just taking your clothes off and dancing around your living room, which is fun, but is not a thing that any of us are interested in doing, and certainly nobody would pay us to do. So I tend to think that because the audience is expecting striptease, when we're putting on a burlesque show, we're going to provide mostly striptease. There may be some other associated variety acts, but certainly that's the expectation I feel like I'm setting because of what the word burlesque means to people. And if I were doing a stricter variety show, I might use a term like cabaret or vaudeville to describe it. Whereas if a show is labeled as burlesque, I think people assume that the bulk of the show is going to consist of stripteases these days. Beyond that, it's a really big box. I've joked on stage before that I don't ever tell people what to do with their bodies, and that includes how they choose to burlesque. Actually, just on Christmas Day, we had a show, which was just a few weeks ago now, obviously. And one of the dancers in the show was like, I don't feel like wearing pasties. Is it okay if I go out there without any pasties on? I want to be in bare nipples. And I was like, I don't care. Because again, we don't have any laws. It's different in other places where that might be a thing that could get people in trouble. But here, we don't have to care about that. And after her act, I joked with the audience. I was hosting the show. And I joked with the audience that I never tell anybody what to do with their nipples. And that's sort of a general statement about burlesque. I will, certainly when I'm hiring performers for a show, I'm concerned with what I think will be entertaining. And I try and cast a broad net for what entertainment means. It's not always just about what I like. It has to be about things that perhaps I've seen an act which I did not think was fantastic, but the audience very much enjoyed it. I've definitely hired many performers over the years who I think sort of fit into that categorization, where I saw an act and I was like, this is fine. But the audience was going crazy for it, and I have to respect that my taste is not universal. And since entertainment is the goal, the audience's opinion is more important than mine anyway.
So where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in Minneapolis. I grew up grade school in the Midwest primarily. Wisconsin, actually started grade school in Illinois, so just outside of Chicago, in Arlington Heights, which is just a suburb of Chicago. And then when I was in second grade, we moved to the suburbs of Portland and West Linn, and I finished most of school there. I've lived in Oregon except for leaving for college to Denver for most of the rest of that time. Although I've lived in a few other places haphazardly along the way.
And so what, in your formative years, led you to performance?
So I got involved in legitimate theater in high school, and the thing that steered me towards that is right at the tail end, there's actually a specific event, right towards the tail end of middle school, in a literature class I was taking. For some reason, the teacher of this literature class had us standing up and reading scenes from this book aloud. I do not believe it was a play. I think it was literally just a book. And I don't recall the context of the scene specifically, but at some point I threw myself across the teacher's desk and made an ass of myself because it was funny. And afterwards, the teacher was like, you should definitely, he might have been the theater instructor in my middle school. I never did any theater in middle school, but he may have been involved with that. And he suggested, he's like, hey, you seem to be having a lot of fun. You should check out like drama and theater when you go to high school, because this was the end of middle school. And so I did, and that was that. That was sort of all she wrote on that topic.
And so what, if any, formal training or education do you have?
Sure. Well, I was involved in theater at Westland High School throughout high school, which Westland, at least when I went there in the early 90s, was sort of noted for its theater program, even though it was just a regular public high school. We put on about twice as many theater productions there as any of the other schools nearby, and had 2 theaters, so we took pretty aggressive use of them. And so I was involved throughout high school. Sort of drifted away from active theater work before in the sort of gap years between high school and college, and then got back into it when I was back in college. And did some community theater work and such after that, and was all sort of tangentially involved in theater, although not working in it specifically after college. After college, I ended up doing political work for a while, which is its own flavor of theater, I guess, but certainly very performative at times.
And so in those formative years, was there anyone who was an influence or an inspiration to you?
I'm sure there was, but I'm so bad at remembering these things. I definitely can recall other performers who I was impressed with their performances, who I sort of aspired to learn the things that they seemed to know. Although a lot of them I'd be hard pressed to recall names at this point. But there was definitely periods there where I was ready that, as I said, when I was first getting into theater, it was the early 90s, which was also sort of the heyday of like great acting in big movies. That was 3 years in a row of Tom Hanks like cranking out Oscar-winning performances right in the middle of when I was in high school, basically. And probably my favorite of those movies was Philadelphia. And I'm not at all a dramatic actor at heart. Like I'm much more of a clown in real life. But dramatic performance like that is always very impressive.
So what year and how did you get started in burlesque?
Sure. So originally, let's see. It would have been early 2010. Or maybe might have even been early, I'm pretty sure early 2010, might have been late 2009. My now ex-wife had heard something about burlesque. I have no idea how, honestly, but probably the internet. And we went I don't recall if we went to a burlesque show before she started taking burlesque lessons, or if we started going to the shows right after she started. So I don't recall the specific order of events at this point. I do joke with some sincerity that I got addicted to burlesque the very first time I was there, because we were at a show at the Bossa Nova Ballroom, and called the Royalties, which is no longer around. And there was a performer there visiting from Seattle by the name of Jezebel Jones, and who is a lovely performer, still performing fantastic. And we were sitting right in the front row, and during her performance, I don't recall the larger context of the performance all, but at one point she motioned for me to come up to the stage to help her undo the clasp on her garter, connecting her garter to her thigh-high stocking. And I, not being unfamiliar with lingerie, I was like, sure, I can do that. And so I go up to the stage, and I reach up to the bed, and she slapped my hand, which was the bit. Very funny, ha ha ha, we all laugh, I sit back down. And I've joked that I got burlesque from her, because clearly it was transmissible. The addendum to that story, I don't remember if that was literally the first burlesque show I went to, might have been the second or third, but a month later at that same show, we're sitting in the front row again, me and my wife, and same exact seats. And there's another performer down from Seattle, the Shanghai Pearl. And she does the exact same thing. Motions for her to come up and undo her garter belt. So I'm just like, I'm going to get hit again. That was the thought I had. Like, they're both from Seattle. It must be a thing up there. And I get up and I undo her garter belt. And I undo it right away because I'm familiar with how those clasps work. I literally just helped my wife at the time put hers on like 40 minutes earlier or something. And so I undid it right away. And so she just had me undo all of them because I was doing it so effectively. And then I just sat back down and she like made kissy face at me or something. I don't remember. And but those two events sort of back to back have always been sort of an amusing bookend of my early burlesque experience. And how I got infected with burlesque, if you will.
It's funny.
Yeah.
So how did you develop your career from that?
Sure. So about 6 months after my ex-wife had started doing burlesque, I remember we saw a post from one of the burlesque performers in town who had like shared a picture and like made a comment about she said something to the effect of, where are all my like centaur and mermaid strippers at, or something to that effect. And this was High Fleisch who posted that. It was also who was also a burlesque producer in town still. And we were just like, my ex-wife and I were both pretty nerdy humans. And we were like, yeah, we should do some nerdy burlesque, because we'd seen other people like in Los Angeles and New York doing pop culture themed nerdy burlesque shows, and nobody in Portland was doing anything like that really. And we were like, yeah, we can do that. We're clever people with education in theater. My ex-wife has a bachelor's in theater management, and I'd done theater in all of the jobs in theater over the intervening like 10 years at that point. And so we're like, yeah, let's do that. And knowing absolutely nothing other than like that we knew some strip teasers and we liked nerd stuff. So we talked to the people who seemed interested when we talked about it. I ended up, when we were looking for a place to do it, we didn't really know anything about booking a performance venue or anything. So we ended up on a lark. There still is a role-playing game and Magic the Gathering store in Portland called Guardian Games. This was their previous location to where they are now, which was much smaller. And I was in there one day. I don't remember why I was there. I was probably buying some nerdy toys of some sort. And I knew the owner a little bit at that point from going into the store. And I asked her, I was like, I think she may have just recently gotten her like license to serve beer and wine. And maybe that was part of what sort of got me thinking this. And I was like, have you ever thought about having like a show here or something like that? And she was like, what kind of show? And I was like, oh, like a nerdy burlesque show. And she seemed interested. And so that ended up being where we had the first show. And so we started that conversation. We started that process probably about late 2010, like November, December 2010. And then the show, or maybe even October, then the show was in, I want to say March of 2011. And, we went slow because we knew what we were doing, so that's fine. But it's the right amount of time anyway. And we ended up renting some rental stage flats and hiring a guy to bring in sound equipment. And we didn't do any advanced ticket sales or anything, but we did a little bit of like posting about it on Facebook and sending out press releases. And we ended up being called in by the Oregonian for a photo shoot and ended up on the front page of the Arts and Entertainment that week, the day before the show. So I don't know how effective that advertising was, because it was literally the Friday before the Saturday the show was that we were on the cover. And did the show. We had a line stretching 2.5 blocks down the street. At the very beginning, we ended up turning away at least 100 people because we had legal capacity for this quite small space. And we were probably cheating with the legal capacity even in that regard, because I believe we sold 140 tickets, which was the full legal capacity of the room. And then, of course, there was all the performers and staff and everything. Don't tell anybody. And so we did the show, and it was, a runaway success. And we're like, well, that was great. And I hosted the show, and that was my first time acting as an emcee at a burlesque show. I'd done a lot of presentational work, and I have no fear of public speaking. So it was not a big stretch for me to do that, I don't think, even though I didn't technically know what I was doing at the time. And I've certainly learned a lot since then. And I shudder to think that there's video of that on YouTube if anybody wants to go watch it, but I'm not going to tell them where to find it. And yeah, so that was the first show. We sold it out. We restaged it about 8 weeks later because of how well it had done at over at the Bossa Nova Ballroom again, which is a significantly larger venue. And at that show, we had about 400 attendees because a bunch of the people showed up who hadn't made it in previously. And we added like one extra act. But other than that, we were just staging the exact same show. And that first show was called Geeklesque because we weren't particularly original. And those were the first two shows we did. And so that would have been March and then like May. And then we staged, or it might have only been like 6 weeks later. It might have been like March and then late April even. Because we tried to turn around as fast as possible because we knew we sort of had the tiger by the tail and had to run with it. And then by September of that year, I had set up 2 different monthly review shows, one of which is still ongoing. That's Burlenomicon at the Lovecraft Bar. The other one was a different one that was not successful, that only ended up running for about 3 months before I pulled the plug on it because it was not working out. And that was at a bar that no longer exists called Agenda. And we did those shows, and Burlenomicon is still going strong 8 odd years later. So they just celebrated their 8th anniversary in September of last year. So that was sort of my regular thing for most of that intervening time. Plus we staged, and then I, once we separated, my ex and I continued staging more of the Geeklesque events for some time. I had the last one of those was in 2017 to celebrate the 40th anniversary of Star Wars, which we called Geeklesque from a Galaxy Far, Far Away. And we staged that at the Paris Theater downtown and did 4 shows over 2 days, and had a lot of fun doing that. And I've got, I think, 2 more of those coming next year, but we'll see if that happens or not. Or this year now. It's 2020 already. Whoops.
It just boggles my mind. How do you start a show like that? Do you have like a trust fund? Do you get all your friends together and they each chip in 12 cents? How does that all work? Well,
at the time, my ex-wife and I were a 2-income, no-kids relationship. So that was the short answer, is that, and, so we hired 10 people, and the initial outlay was probably $500 or $600 because we rented those stage flats for the non-performance location. And we got a very good deal from a sound guy we knew who just had a bunch of sound stuff. He did it all for $150, including running all the equipment for us. So some of it was who you know. Some of it was like having the wherewithal to not be afraid of being out. Like $600, right? When you're 2 people with jobs is not implausible, and we were middle class. So that's the real answer. Is we didn't necessarily know if we were going to make any money, but we weren't. The costs didn't seem like we were going to be wildly out of sorts. And at the time, it was pretty typical for shows in Portland at the time, of which there were not very many by comparison to today, to pay on just a split of the door. So our agreement with the performers was it would just be an even split of the money at the door after expenses. My ex-wife and I actually, as I recall, didn't actually make any money that show. We didn't pay ourselves at all because we didn't know what we were doing. And so all the money we took at the door basically got turned around to cover the $600 odd in expenses we generated, and then was just split amongst all the performers, which included my ex-wife. So she got paid. I don't think I got paid. I don't. It's a long time ago. I don't remember. I don't think we got paid. We may have just decided to pay everybody else extra instead, because it was not particularly important to us at the time. So yeah, the answers are is we took a lot of time to figure out what it was going to cost and made sure it was affordable.
Yeah.
And there were certainly cheaper options than what we did. We spent less money the second show to be at the Bossa Nova and pay the fees to the venue than it cost us to stage the show that we made less money at the first time. Because our total costs at the first show were probably on the order of maybe $600 or $700, and our total cost for the Bossa Nova was more on the order of like $400. So we made more money there by a fair margin, and paid ourselves. So that was nice too, which we then just used the money to pay for more shows. It's a revolving door of money. Yeah.
And what do you do outside of burlesque?
Well, when I first got involved in burlesque, I was working for the Army Corps of Engineers in network security and IT operations, which was particularly amusing the Monday right after that article had come out with my face smacked onto the front of the paper, and which was also hung up at the Starbucks right by my work downtown because they knew me there too. And my boss was like, "Hey, can I get your autograph?" Like Monday morning, and I was like, "What?" And he had a copy of the Arts and Entertainment with all of us on it, which was funny. And so at the time, that's what I was doing. And I stopped doing computer work. Left there about 4 years ago. Did about another year and a half of computer IT work as my main source of income. And then I got laid off from a small startup and was just not interested in continuing that line of work anymore, frankly. I used to joke that the reason I wasn't a computer science major in college, even though I'd done a lot of computer work already in my gap in between college and high school, was that I like people more than computers, and that continues to be the case. So when I got laid off from this software startup that I've been working at, I sort of took a step back and took a look at where I wanted to be, and these days I primarily just produce and host cabaret shows. And I certainly don't make as much money as I did when I was a gainfully employed professional, but I'm happier with my life on it by a huge margin. And these days, in addition to shows, which I do almost at least one show a week, often more than that, I also run an Airbnb in the basement of the place I live. So that's the supplementary steady income to keep the keel even.
So the burlesque community in Oregon or Portland,
sure.
The stereotype is that there are male producers and female performers. Is that true in Portland? What's that like?
I don't know that that's ever been true. So I'm sure there are snapshots of time where that might have been a majority descriptor, but they've been brief. So when we produced our first show, or even when I started producing Burlenomicon and had regular shows, I was one of only two male-identified show producers in town. And at the time, that might have, there were fewer shows 9 years ago than there are now. So there were periods where that might have been 50% of the people producing shows in town. Now there are still 2.5. It sort of depends how one decides to count Sinferno Cabaret at Dante's, since that's produced by the venue but has a wide variety of people who've managed it over the years. There's still, of the primary burlesque community producers in Portland, there's still 2 male presenting burlesque producers in town. Actually, that's not true. Rewind. I am making a mistake. There's 4, although 2 of them always co-produce together. So there's sort of 3 sets, because at the time when I started, there was Zora Phoenix, who is a gender illusionist and is otherwise a male presenting performer who produced a variety show and a burlesque show. The burlesque show had actually just very recently started that year. The variety show had predated it. Now only the burlesque shows remain. These days, so there's still Zora Phoenix, there's myself, and then there is the co-producing team known as Izani, which is Isaiah Esquire and Johnny Nuriel. And for a long time, they had only produced a single show called Boyerism, but now they actually have several other irons in the fire. So now there's sort of 4, or if you count them as teams, 3 male-centric burlesque production teams in town, and there's a solid, and we're in the minority, I would argue. I can name a double handful of female presenting burlesque producers currently. And again, I don't think it's ever been more than 50%. And even that's been an outlier when that's been the case. It's been that, if that's been the case, it's been because of like a brief hiccup while things were reorganizing themselves. Zora Phoenix and I are both, have both produced very long-term shows. Maybe, so that might color people's impression that way, because we've both been at it for a long time. And I don't know how much of the idea that we're the... I mean, there are people who've asked me if other people produce burlesque shows in this town all the time, and I'm like, yeah, lots of people. But nobody knows necessarily. They only know the people they know. So if they've only seen me, and they see me every Saturday, they may think that's what's going on when there's really a dozen other things happening at any given moment. Currently, I can only think of one regular monthly production, and that's human error is possible here. I may not be remembering everything. That's every single month that is primarily female produced, and that is. But there's a whole bunch of shows that are bi-monthly and quarterly, and on those sorts of rotations rather than monthly. And I don't know why that is. Certainly, there have been a lot of like lean years over the time for me, and I'm ornery and have stuck it out anyway. If I think it's working, I'll keep working at it, even if it's not necessarily good today. I know it'll bounce back next week. So might be some of that.
Okay. So in Portland, who comes to burlesque? What's the audience like?
Depends on the show. Different venues attract different flavors of audience members. Different producers and performers attract their own fans. There's certainly a sort of a kind of burlesque fan who only goes to see burlesque at one venue that they go to, and that's the place where they see burlesque. And they like the burlesque they see there, but they've never branched out to any other venues because that's a bar they like or a place they like, or maybe it's convenient for them to park next to. There's definitely, and I think I don't know how much of that is a Portland thing versus a human thing, because people like going places they've been before. There are certainly people I see at shows at specific venues all the time who I never see at other venues, even though they like the things and they like the performers, and most of the performers perform at many venues. So I think it's just sort of a human nature thing where people stay where they feel comfortable and welcome, and so there is some variance there. And it's tricky then. It's like, are they fans of burlesque or are they fans of the bar the burlesque is at? Are they fans of a performer, or do they like the place where that performer performs a lot and that's just where they go see them and they're not going to bother going to see them other places? If there were, I don't know that there's a generic burlesque audience member in Portland. At a lot of burlesque shows, I would say, if I were to stereotype the burlesque audience in Portland, and it would be a stereotype, I would say that there are probably more women in the audience than men. And it varies by how much. I have seen shows where it's pretty even split, and I've seen shows where it's 80-20. And I don't necessarily know that there's a rhyme or reason to it for it, beyond the idea that you see a lot more bachelorette parties than bachelor parties at burlesque shows. Although both definitely happen. Beyond that, there's a lot of like girlfriend dates, meaning girls out with their friends dates at burlesque shows. More so, I would say, than there are dates, like romantic dates in any orientation of people. But that's, again, a stereotype. I don't have a running audience survey at all times, so I could definitely be making mistakes. And it also depends like what other stuff happens at the venue that lures people in. Not a lot of the burlesque venues in this town have a particularly effective, what's the word I'm looking for? Like walk-up traffic. Like people don't necessarily go there and then find out what's happening. They're there for whatever's happening. There are a few exceptions. Dante's Downtown is probably the only venue where burlesque is performed in this town where people will show up at that venue and ask what's happening and decide to go inside. And they have cabaret and burlesque there every Sunday, which helps, and at other random times. When the Oregon Burlesque Festival was there, which it was for its first 4 years, I believe, there was definitely any number of people who would walk up on Friday or Saturday night while the festival was happening, find out that it was happening, and be willing to pay to come in. And that's somewhat unique at that venue as opposed to most other venues that have burlesque in this town. People may come to the venue. Crush Bar is a very popular cocktail bar. And every once in a while people will be there and hear the show happening in the back theater room and decide to come in. But that's a few people there. It's a handful in any given show, 5 maybe. The show I do on Saturdays is in a jazz club, and we go on following the bands, and a lot of people stay after the band to watch us. And that's a fun show for the community because, or at least I think so, because it's a chance for us to get a whole bunch of people who would not otherwise have come to a burlesque show and have probably never seen a burlesque show before. And that's always a lot of fun. At some of the shows at the more burlesque-centric venues, everyone will have been to a burlesque show before. And new people are fun.
So, could you paint a picture, describe a week in the life of being a creative industry entrepreneur?
Describe a week in the life. Well, it depends on the week, certainly. Right now, I'm doing a show every single week, so I have sort of a rhythm to my week because of that. And then that gets entirely thrown off whenever I add additional shows. These last 2 weeks, instead of my regular Saturday night shows, we had shows on Christmas and New Year's Eve, which did not really mess with the rhythm particularly, because just instead of being there on Saturdays, we were there on a Wednesday and Tuesday, respectively. But at Burlesque, which I mentioned before, I used to have that show is on the second Tuesday of every single month. And for the first year of this new weekly engagement, I was doing that as well as the weekly show. And after a year and a bit of that, I decided I did not have the bandwidth to devote to the work that Burlesque deserved for promotion and etc. Because promotion is 40% of the work in a given week that needs to be done, probably. And I probably only do about half as much as I should be doing. And so in January of, last year, in January of 2019, I made a deal with another performer in town to take over booking and hosting that show. And I've been back to host it several times as a guest host since, but it is now her baby, and that is Natasha Riot, who has taken over that show and is doing a great job with it, and I'm happy that it's continuing apace. Because I'd be sad to see it go after all this time, but I definitely did not have the energy to devote that it needed. And that partially because that's a venue, again, that attracts a little bit of walk-up traffic, but really needs the promotional work to make sure the room is full, especially on a Tuesday night. Tuesday is hardly an ideal go out to the club night for most people. I started it originally when I worked for the Department of Defense because I did not work on Wednesdays. My schedule was Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, 10-hour days. And so I was like, I'm going to do a show on Tuesday night. There's nothing happening on Tuesday night, which there was not. There's a lot more weeknight shows in Portland now than there were 9 years ago. And I'd be much more hesitant to try and pick a random weeknight to start a thing now because of that. So yes, random week. Sorry, I totally wandered off that question. So for my weekly show, me personally, I tend to be booked about 4 to 6 weeks out. So on any given week, I'm booking the performers for the future. And I've forgotten who's in the show this week because I'm distracted. And doing promotional posting on the internet and, sharing pictures and Facebook stories and Instagram and all the various social media nonsense. Coordinating with other people who do some of that promotional work for me, because farming off work on other people is the way you get ahead. And also, I handle all the administrative back end on the shows because it's easier for me to do that than to try and show somebody else how to do it most of the time. Which means getting the music from the performers, figuring out what their technical needs are, if there's lighting or sound needs, or if they need specific equipment moved on and off the stage, whatever stuff, and setting up all of the back end for that. I act as my own stage manager at the show because it's a variety review that happens every week. There's not enough going on that I need somebody else to be in charge of it. If it were twice as big, I'd hire a stage manager. In between where it is now and twice as big is where I'd probably mess up because I would not hire a stage manager soon enough. And a good stage manager is not to be denied. So, yeah. Did I answer the question? Typical week. Lots of emails. Like I'm constantly communicating with people electronically about future bookings, traveling performers who might be coming to town from out of state, because one of the advantages of having a show that's every week right now is it's really easy for me to catch people as they happen to wander through Portland on their way to other places. So I get to work with a lot of traveling performers. These last 2 months I've recently been coordinating with Isaiah and Johnny, because they're doing a lot of bringing in performers from out of town, and they love getting them other opportunities performing there in town, and they know that I have a show every Saturday, so they send me all the people they bring to town, which is great because I get all the advantages of people coming to town without having to do any of the work.
You mentioned the Jack London Review has a special relationship with the venue. Mm-hmm. Is that unique? Can you describe that?
Well, because it is primarily a live music venue, and that's its bread and butter. It's primarily a jazz or blues club, depending on the night. And so its primary purpose is to operate as a jazz club, and we're hired to be there by the venue specifically, rather than collecting the money ourselves that comes in to pay for the show. To continue entertaining the crowd after the band is done. And yes, people will come to see us specifically, but our primary purpose is to keep the crowd there and enjoying the bar's services for longer.
Right.
I joke sometimes on stage there that I'm really just a well-dressed discount mozzarella stick, and that just like the discount food at happy hour, that's why I'm there, so that you will hang out and have another drink. But yeah, so that's a unique relationship with that, and because of that, at a typical show thereafter, we're there with the band, between 50 and 100 people from the music show will decide to stay. Depends on sort of what kind of crowd the band draws, and how into the idea they are, and how quickly we get turned over. And then those people are often entirely unfamiliar with burlesque, or have maybe gone once in the past. And it's a lot of fun for us because we get these people who we otherwise would not get a chance to expose to burlesque.
Cool.
Pun only half intended.
So with all this stuff happening in Portland, mm-hmm. do you apply to festivals and travel the burlesque circuit at all? I
did more in the past. I don't as much anymore, partially for financial reasons. It was easier when I had a day job to support, random traveling. And mostly I encourage people who want to travel to perform, not to travel to festivals. Festivals serve an important purpose in as much as they're sort of networking events, but they're not generally particularly lucrative for the performers in them, partially because there's so many performers in your average burlesque festival. A typical burlesque festival might have 30 performances in a night, whereas a typical burlesque show probably has something more on the order of 8 to 12 or 8 to 15 or something. And whatever the pile of money is that's being divided for the night, obviously the more people there are, the smaller the pieces. So even though burlesque festivals in America have definitely tilted towards paying their performers, whereas 5 or 6 years ago that was not particularly common, it's still not. I still don't think it's like a particularly lucrative thing, except for perhaps the people who are headlining the show and are brought in specifically to do it. The last festival I was involved with, it was in Boston about 5 years ago. And that was nice because my mom and my sister came to the show, who my sister lived in Boston at the time, my mom lived in Virginia. And she came up and stayed with my sister, and they came to the show I performed at, which was a lot of fun. Because my mom has not lived nearby me since I started doing this. And that particular festival has had some scandals with the person producing it, so it's not been going on for several years. I'm not familiar with all the details, so I wouldn't want to speak, but that's definitely, there are a lot of burlesque festivals in the country now. The only two I attended with any regularity were the Burlesque Hall of Fame weekend in Las Vegas, which is a fundraiser for the Burlesque Hall of Fame Museum. And I the last time I was in that was, I think, I've never performed at it, allow me to clarify. The last time I was at that was about 4 years ago, and that's that is, I always joke that it's sort of summer camp for traveling burlesque performers, because you get to see all the people you don't get to see all the time. And the other event I quite like attending and attended with some regularity was BurlyCon up in Seattle, which I haven't been to in 2 years. 2 years now. I didn't go the last 2 years. Partially because it's that's primarily an educational event, and unfortunately because of its nature and the fact that each of the classes are maybe an hour and a half long, and they tend to focus on a much more sort of like beginner approach of what the information being shared is. So I think it becomes less and less valuable to people the longer they've been performing, except as a networking event and a fun time, which it is.
So shifting to more artistic aspects, I guess. As a producer, how do you curate a show?
Sure. Well, it depends on the show. For the most part, for the variety review that I do every week, or when I was doing monthly variety reviews, it was mostly as simple as I would see people performing at other events, and I would reach out to them, and people would occasionally reach out to me and say, "Hey, I'd like to be in your show. And they'd be like, "Well, what's the process?" And I would be like, "Well, if I've seen you perform and I already like you, then the answer would be like, yes, come be in my show." If I had not seen them perform previously, I would often ask them to submit a video of a past performance so that I could at least get an idea for what their style of performance is, and etc. I'm actually about to set up a set of auditions for my current show, because there are now enough people performing in town that I feel like I can't possibly see everybody. I make a large effort as a show producer to go to other people's shows and watch the performers, because it's a chance for me to find performers I wouldn't find anyway. And I try to, and this is something I've tried to do the entire time I've been producing shows in Portland, is to go to as many different shows as possible so that I can bring as wide a variety of talent to my own shows. Much like the burlesque audience I was talking about earlier is most comfortable at certain shows, there are a lot of producers who don't necessarily go to shows that aren't at venues that they go to very frequently, so they may not get exposed to performers coming in from other directions. And I've always tried to make myself an active participant in shows that are not necessarily ones I would go to otherwise, so that I can see what's going on at them and find out if any of the performers are people I would want to work with. And it mostly works out. Every once in a while I'll end up at a show, I'm like, oh man, this isn't good, I should go now. But that's just me being a judgy artist type.
And then as a performer, what's your process for creating a new piece of burlesque for you yourself to perform?
Sure. Well, it depends. So there's sort of a couple of different angles I guess you could approach it from. I tend to probably mostly make burlesque acts in sort of a top-down fashion, like, meaning I have I'm going to do an act as such and such character. And then what do I do? Like the high concept feeds to the details. I don't think that's necessarily universal. I think that you can definitely come the opposite direction. I would like to do an act to this song, and now I'm going to figure out what that means. Is a different way, is another angle to come at it from. The most recent piece that I was involved in creating was, it ended up being a trio piece, although it did not start that way. Natasha Riot, who I mentioned earlier, was producing a pop culture themed show themed around the Joss Whedon television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And she had put up an application for it, and I had seen the application and had a loose idea for an act, but didn't actually apply because I was too busy at the time that summer. And I mentioned to her maybe a couple of days after she'd closed the application at backstage at another show. I was like, yeah, I had this kind of idea for a thing, but I didn't really have time to flesh it out, and I kind of wish I had, because now I feel like I have more time. And I told her the loose concept for the act, which was that there was a musical episode of that TV show with an all-singing, all-dancing demon who made everybody sing and dance. And I've always joked that if I were going to have any superpowers, turning the world into a musical wouldn't be half bad. And I was like, I sort of have an idea for doing an act as the musical demon. And I'm like, but it'd be like a duet or something, and so I needed rehearsals or tricky timing and stuff, so I didn't apply. And a couple of days after we had this conversation, she was like, hey, I actually could use another act in that show. Do you want to try and put that together? And I was like, yeah, let me. I'm like, it's a duet, because that's where it started in my mind, because there's a dancing scene between the demon and one of the characters, and that would be fun to do. And I told her, well, let me find out if anybody else, one of the people I think can help me with it can do it, and I'll find out if it's a thing we can do. And I reached out to another performer. Originally, the scene before the musical demon appears includes a ballet sequence, because the actress on that TV show who's in that scene is a former ballet dancer. So it's this very light, airy ballet scene. So I was like, oh, I should hire somebody who knows ballet, and then we can do that and then the duet. So I reached out to a performer whose name is Carly LeVay du Soleil, who is a trained ballet dancer who also does burlesque. And I reached out to her, and she was like, yep, I'm into it. Let's make it happen. And I got to work editing the music and put together some music I was pretty happy with, which was a whole medley of sound editing complaints on my side, but took a little while to get together. And then it ended up that we decided that we also needed a third person. So then it became a trio act. We got a third person involved. Risa Larev, also a ballet dancer who is a burlesque performer. Although the funny part about them both being ballet dancers is all of the ballet got cut during the creative process, and none of that got used at all. So the fact that they're ballet dancers turned out to be entirely irrelevant to it in the end. And so then we staged that as a trio dance piece at the Buffy the Vampire Slayer themed show. And it went over very well, and we were actually asked back to do it at multiple other shows since then. And we'll be doing it again, I think, in February of this year as well, which is a lot of fun. So the creative process for that was, hey, there's this scene from this TV show with this song I like. And then it all snowballed from there. And its actual similarity to the TV show is very small. But it definitely uses sort of the concept of a demon seducing somebody and via song and dance as sort of the underlying thing. And then it all ends with a show tune medley dance battle, because who doesn't like show tune medleys? As an old musical theater kid, I'm certainly a sucker for show tunes. So
great. So the topic of cultural appropriation is foremost in a lot of people's minds. Mm-hmm. What do you do as a producer to monitor that or promote it? Well, not promote it, but
prevent it.
Prevent it. Thank you.
Well, the short answer is sort of deplatforming, right? Like you don't put acts on stage that you would want to have to defend later on. Most recently, there actually was some performers did an act at one of my shows, and it wasn't terribly culturally appropriate, but I reached out to them because they were newer performers. It was a dance trio who'd done an act that referenced the costuming of Josephine Baker with her banana skirt and stuff. And these performers are all relatively white presenting. They're not actually all strictly Caucasian, but point stand. And I reached out to one of them and I was like, FYI, that you could get some grief over this and you may want to rethink using that piece of costume. And it was really just the costuming. I'm like, the act is not dependent on the costuming. If you lose that, I don't think anybody will give you any problems, but it's something to be cognizant of. And they took the criticism positively. I don't think they've staged that act that way since. And it was, I believe, accidental and not meant in that particular case. I don't think it was meant to cause any harm, and nobody actually complained about it to me. I reached out to them because I wanted them to not inadvertently offend or harm others. And that's maybe I'm being overly sensitive, and obviously just a skirt made out of bananas is hardly the most terrible thing in the world. I mean, Carmen Miranda's, pineapple hat is not a real far step away from that either. Although maybe that would be cultural appropriation too. I'm not Brazilian, but was she Brazilian? She's Brazilian, right? I honestly don't remember. And there are certainly acts that people I know did 10 years ago that I don't think they would do now. A lot of that conversation has happened in the last 4 or 5 years. I recall a show that was produced here in Portland that was country themed, I guess, for lack of a better word. So each performer was representing sort of a different country in their act. And there were some acts in that I don't think anybody would perform now. Performed by white presenting performers, not presenting white presenting culture, white originated culture. And of course, there's the underpinning issue of colonization of culture and exploitation of culture that is not your own. I don't think on the West Coast the sensitivity to that is pretty high amongst the performance community, and it's higher in say America than it is in Europe, particularly to our own cultural heritage here in North America. Whereas there was a kerfuffle a year or two ago about a French performer doing an act as a dressed as a Native American woman, which is pretty far divorced from not only her culture but her historical culture. And she didn't understand, I don't think, why it was a problem, because none of that's part of her history, which is ignorance, not an intent to cause harm, but it's still a thing that causes harm to some of the people involved. I'm a white guy hosting a cabaret show in a jazz club, and jazz is already there's some question right there about where we are on that as cultural appropriation, but I suppose we go down that rabbit hole, then we have to ask questions about rock and roll and everything else too. And mostly it's just a matter of being sensitive to it as a very white burlesque producer. I mostly I put a more active effort into just making sure I'm bringing performers of color and other minority presenting attributes to the stage with some frequency. Sometimes diversity is not about tokenization so much as it's about having your cast not all look the same all the time. I remember joking with two of my performer friends who were at a show together who were both statuesque blonde women. I was like, I can't have you guys at a show together again or people are going to start to talk about me. Because it's a little much. You guys are, it's just too much buxom blonde in a show with only 4 people in it. People are going to start thinking I have a thing. And yeah, but it is tricky, especially in the town, as Portland is very, very white, and that's not, that's just demographics. That's not news to anybody. So the performance community is also very, very white. And there's definitely effort involved in making sure that performers of color or other minority groups want to feel comfortable in your show and would like to be in the show, because if they don't ever see anybody who is like them on your stage, they're going to assume that you don't want people like them on your stage. And so the best I can do is find the good performers who are not like everybody else and give them performance opportunities so that everybody else can see that the stage is welcome to everybody who entertains. Because that's always my logic. This sounds kind of like nonsense claims of colorblindness, but I really only want to care about how entertaining you are on the stage. But I'm also happy that several times since we started the show at the Jack London, at the request of a performer, she asked if it would be fun to have a show where all of the performers were performers of color. And I was like, let's do it. And we've done that 3 or 4 times now at her request. And then all of these are people who are in the show at other times as well. That none of these people are unique to that show. But it's fun to have a show that's all people for whom a jazz club is really the right environment anyway, right? And that said, I never tell anybody that's what's happening with that show, because I don't feel comfortable marketing it as if I'm doing something special, because I'm not. I'm just putting people on stage who I would put on stage anyway, and it would feel exploitative to me to brag about how I'm having a show that's all performers of color. Also, because it's not really, because I'm on stage. So it's 90% performers of color, and then me. And it's also, there's also the tricky dynamic, and this applies to burlesque whenever, a lot of the time anyway, where you were asking before about the sort of traditional metric of the male producer and the female performers. I don't think it's necessarily any better if the person doing all the talking is always from the dominant social group, whether that's a man talking for women or a white person talking for people of color. And since I'm mostly my own MC and do most of the talking, that's always sort of in the back of my head that makes me feel sketchy in those contexts. Although, I mean, I like to joke on stage that you never let dancers talk, but that's a joke, not reality. I mostly don't want to let anybody talk, though, so... Because a lot of people are not very good public speakers, and I'm trying to keep a level of professionalism at work. But there's definitely always a little bit of concern, I think, from anybody in that sort of position, that you want to make sure that you're not sort of seen as speaking for other people, and I try to avoid that. I'm there to, as an MC, I've said before that I think that the job of an MC is you're an advocate for both sides, right? You're not a judge. You're more like if you're both sides' lawyer, if the sides are the audience and the performers. I'm advocating for the performers to the audience, so the audience knows who the performers are and what they're doing. But I'm also advocating for the audience to the performers to keep the audience engaged and happy with what's going on. And in neither case am I speaking for anybody.
So people in burlesque have mentioned that they think burlesque is empowering to not only the performers but also the audience. What's your take on that?
I'm not sure I know what it means, like, frankly. I think that successful performance is very much uplifting emotionally and physiologically, right? There's every actor knows that stage fright is just about your adrenaline doing its job, and there's a reason why theater acting is exhausting, even if you're not dancing and singing, if you're just on stage, being on stage. So I think that there's definitely some room to sort of conflate those responses with, because it become like the performance high is definitely a thing, right? And that is a very positive feeling. And if by empowering people mean they're meant to feel positive, I definitely can see that. And I know that for some performers, the act of taking their clothes off in front of people they feel is subversive is not the word I'm looking for. It contravenes expectations, at least. And that often applies to, say, performers of color or some male performers, who are maybe an audience is not expecting a male performer, or a non-binary performer, or a disabled performer. Just the act of engaging in being sexy as part of a group that is not traditionally seen as sexy in the dominant culture. I could definitely see where that is, that confrontation with expectations is, could be described, I guess, as empowering. But I'm never quite sure what people mean by empowering, so I don't really want to speak for anybody else as to whether or not it is. Okay. For myself, I like performing because I like entertaining people, and I like putting on an effective performance that does whatever I'm trying to do in that performance. Entertain the audience, be funny, be sexy, be well choreographed, etc. But I certainly, like, if there's an emotional need for me that it's fulfilling, it's more part of that, like, I did a thing and I was successful. That applies to a wide variety of activities. I don't know that I necessarily, but again, white male, like, do I need to be empowered? I probably don't.
What are your ideas about burlesque as a force for social change?
I think it's the main reason I would see it as a force for social change is because it's a chance to get audiences thinking, potentially, but groups of people, right? Like it's a soapbox sometimes, right? Because you've got an audience, and if you don't have an audience, you're not going to have much influence on society, because people need to communicate to have an impact on society. Here in Oregon, we have it goes back to the no blue laws things, right? We're not really confronting society in Portland very much, because we're not breaking laws. We're not engaging in civil disobedience or anything like that just by doing burlesque, which can be the case in other places. And, you know, I've definitely heard people say to performers that they were inspired by seeing someone like themselves on stage. So the representation matters argument is completely a thing that I'm 100% with. And so there's definitely the social change of people who have not seen themselves presented as sexual creatures in public before, I think has some value. And there are, then there's definitely the burlesque acts that are a political commentary, which have existed forever in burlesque. And, I'm sure I don't doubt that in the 70s there was any number of women taking their tops off with Richard Nixon masks on, because I have faith that things have not changed that much. And I've seen people do it with almost any president you can think of, and even long dead presidents, but that might have been a Point Break act. So it's always the question how much social change you can inflict. I think, the social dial moves very slowly. And in most places, we're not forcing anybody to watch burlesque, right? The people who are there want to be there at least notionally, or may have been dragged by their friends, and can leave. It's not a prison. So there's only so much change you can inflict on people, and they are willing, which makes it easier to maybe change their opinions. But at the same time, you can only shift one side of the window when only the people who would come talk to you anyway are already there. And I, as I mentioned, I worked in politics for a long time, so it's like I'm ready to descant at length on that topic, but I don't really want to.
What are the challenges facing burlesque?
In Portland, because I don't really want to beyond, they vary from place to place, right? Like I mentioned how we don't have a lot of legal challenges here, but I have burlesque performer friends in other parts of the country whose shows have been shut down by the law, right? And that's a problem we don't have here. And I have friends from here who had a show in Washington shut down by the local constabulary. That was years ago, but it definitely happened. They were going to do a show at a bowling alley, and the cops came in and said you couldn't do it. Like the local sheriff shut the show down. This was somewhere in Washington State, which made no sense, and I'm pretty sure was not in accordance with the law. But you don't fight the law, at least not in that context. But there were great pictures of them bowling in their fancy burlesque outfits, which made it all worthwhile. Here, if there were challenges to, well, I'm going to segment this answer, I guess. So there are challenges for the burlesque community. There are challenges for burlesque performers as individuals. And then there's challenges maybe to the concept of burlesque as like an art form and what it means. I think the challenges for the community are mostly, the kind of challenges everybody faces in capitalism, like making sure there's enough money, making sure you're bringing new audience members to the table so that you can grow your audience and make sure people are getting remunerated for their activities in a reasonable fashion. And I think that's one of the things that has had people quit after producing for a while, is that it's easy to be putting a whole lot of work in for not a lot of reward if you're not keeping your eye on those numbers all the time. There's a whole business component that is not the fun part of the job. And I didn't even talk about when I talk about what I do every week in burlesque, but it's a thing I'm thinking about all the time because it is how I pay my rent and eat my food these days. So, for Portland, probably the primary challenge facing the burlesque community is, I think, and this is just my opinion, I'm sure other people would disagree, they probably, some of the people who want to produce shows in this town should cast a slightly broader net into the locations they're producing them to spread out where the shows occur, and expose and get new audience members, because that's important. If you want to grow more stuff, you need more audience members. That's the growth that's most important. And it's hard to find places to perform burlesque if you don't know how to talk to venue owners and all these other things that are tricky. So I get why new producers just want to do a thing at a place that's already done it a whole bunch. It's not a strong growth potential choice though. For performers, the challenges are varied. I mean, some of them, there's health issues related to just being a dancer. A lot of I've been working with people now for 9 years, approaching 10 years, and some of them have been performing for 12 or 13 years, and, and are now in their late 30s or early 40s, and, your knees are not so great, and, you take 5 ibuprofen every morning, and that's just real life sometimes. And then there's the financial challenges. Like, there's a stereotype that burlesque costumes are very expensive, and a lot of them look like they are, and a lot of them are. They don't necessarily need to be, and there's definitely room to substitute other expertise for money in costuming, especially if one wants to become a seamstress or learns to become a seamstress. Money can substitute for skills you don't have, but you can also substitute skills you have for money you don't have. And since every burlesque performer sort of operates in a vacuum, it's a very self-managed creative process. Most of the acts are solos. You create an act, you build the costume, you settle on the music, you decide on your choreography. It's one of the things the burlesque performers, I think a lot of people who come to burlesque from other art forms like about burlesque is it's the first time they've ever been their own boss. If they come from dance or theater, they've never had a creative choice in their life by comparison. Tiny things, whereas all of a sudden they get to do all the things they want to do with nobody telling them they can't. Which is a lot of responsibility too, because if your act is bad, that's all if that's all you, then when it goes wrong or it doesn't work, and you can fix it, that's fine, because you're not beholden to anybody. But and there's the challenge of for newer performers, there's the challenge of oh man, I need to find out if this thing I thought of has been done by 50 million other people, or is it actually new, or is somebody in town doing this exact thing because it's a kind of obvious idea, and if I do it, everybody's gonna be like, that so-and-so does this exact thing, and then I'm gonna have to stop doing it because I don't want to constantly be misassociated or look like I was ripping off their idea. So I think those are common challenges for burlesque performers. Like, the economics are challenging, the creative process can be challenging, and what part of the creative process is challenging has a lot to do with what your background is and how prepared you are for different art forms. Like, I'm not a costumer. I hire other people to make costumes for me, which means economically I can only make a new act every once in a while because it costs me money to make a new act because I can't do it myself. I have the time, and choreography I can learn, choreography I can make, music I can edit myself. Creative choices are fine, but you need a costume to bring it all together sometimes, and those resources are limited. And different resources are more limited for different people depending on what their expertises are and what their income level is, and etc. And then challenges for burlesque, just sort of in general. 8 or 9 years ago, I might have said that there was a constant sort of struggle for legitimacy. I feel like that's less true now, and that's probably just Portland. I can't speak. I'm sure it varies. Our scene here has gotten so mature, by which I mean that when I talk about people who've been performing burlesque for 13 or 14 years, that's here in Portland. They've been performing burlesque for 13 or 14 years. Sinferno Cabaret celebrated its 18th anniversary in 2019, and that's been going every Sunday for 18 years. So there's a lot of maturity to the scene, and people are at least tangentially aware of burlesque in Portland, I would argue. Even people who've never been to a burlesque show, they're the people who like some kind of a strip show, right? Like, kind of thing. They may not know anything about it. They may not have a very accurate impression of what it's actually going to be, but you're not entirely rowing upstream with the idea of going out to burlesque shows or cabaret shows. And even the success of things like Drag Race have probably helped with that because of it. It's very much an adjacent art form to burlesque in a lot of ways. And so the idea of going out to cabaret shows or drag shows or burlesque shows are all, in many places, those are huge overlap amongst all those categories anyway. There are drag performers at a lot of burlesque shows and vice versa. So, and more of that is happening in Portland now too. So as an art form, I think probably the biggest struggle now is probably dealing with the changing methods of communication with potential audience members. There's a joke in advertising in America that Americans have become immune to advertising because we've been doing it to ourselves for 100 years, basically. Like, modern advertising is 100 years old and kind of doesn't work anymore. We're all immunized to it and pay no attention to it. And That's true for everybody. I stopped, like I used to print show posters and hang them all up and down the busy streets in Portland and get handbills to go to the wherever. And I very rarely do that anymore because I don't think it's an effective way to advertise. The return on investment is really hard to track. But then online advertising and new media advertising has its own whole set of challenges. Whether or not like there are issues with like how much theoretical skin is shown in a picture that you're using to advertise on a social media platform or any online advertising platform, because they all have rules about it. Google AdSense doesn't let you use naked people as advertising either. But everybody in America is staring at their phone all the time, so you really want to be advertising on their phone at them. But even then, like, we all ignore those ads. I mean, how many ads does the average person pay no attention to on their phone every day? I would assume it's in the literal thousands. So I think it is true that our best advocates to the rest of the world for burlesque are basically people we've gotten to like it who bring other people. Which that's true in literally every industry. Like, personal recommendations get you your best business in every industry. And we are just as dependent on them as everybody else. And not everybody involved in burlesque show production is a salesperson or has a sense for how that works or understands it even remotely. They might just, the artists are bad at business is a stereotype, but it is sometimes true. So that is probably like the lack of understanding of like how to reach out to people is probably the largest challenge in general. Because again, without an audience, we aren't doing anything.
So to wrap up,
mm-hmm.
What do you wish the general public would understand about burlesque?
I don't know that I have an answer to that question. I don't think the general public needs to understand burlesque, like, any more than the general public needs to understand what parts of special effects were happening in the last Star Wars movie, right? They just need to be entertained and want to come see it. And if they don't, that's fine. I don't love square dancing, but I'm happy that it exists and other people enjoy it. So I don't know that there's an answer to that question. I think that some people who see burlesque will enjoy it and want to come back, and I hope they do. I don't think there's an answer to that question that has any sensible answer to me. It's just, I hope that people who like it share it with other people, and maybe they'll like it, but not everything's for everybody. I've had very good friends of mine come to some burlesque shows and then tell me after a couple times, like, yeah, I don't really think burlesque's for me. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Again, square dancing is not for me. I love lots of kind of dancing. Square dancing's weird. But yeah, so I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think the general public needs to know anything about burlesque any more than I need to know anything about cricket. Like, it's fine that people are ignorant of things that they're not all that interested in. And if they are, I would hope that people respect that things exist that they aren't interested in. That's probably more important, right? And again, we have it really easy here. Nobody's trying to shut down the burlesque shows that are happening in Portland. So we don't have that issue where I'm like, I wish people knew this was an okay thing. But maybe in the rest of the world, that'd be my wish for burlesque in other parts of the world. I wish that they didn't have to deal with that kind of nonsense, because I'm not happy to see my friends having their shows shut down in other parts of the country. So.
All right. Thank you very much.
No problem.